Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. My name's Rihanna Archie, and I'm the Marketing Manager for Sustainable Choice Group. Today's session is focused on a question we hear constantly from our members right now, and that's how do we make ESG stack up commercially inside our organization when everyone's worried about budget? Um, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it only makes sense to consider budgets and risk management and growth when you're putting together a strategy. So, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm joining from today. I acknowledge the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I want to acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters, and community, and acknowledge that this land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So, to give you an idea of what to expect today, Daniel's going to present for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So, if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat. He might feel like answering real time, and if not, we'll go through the Q&A at the end. You can use the like button as an upvote. So, if you see a question that really relates with you, then give it a like, and that'll upvote it to the top and give it a better chance of getting answered. So, everyone knows that there are new reporting expectations. Some are formal and some are not, like from government and from consumers and supply chains. There's always scrutiny, there's tightening budgets, there's pressure to show value within the businesses we work for. And that all creates a very real challenge when we think about where do we invest now, what's going to deliver ROI for the business in the next 12 to 24 months, and what can reasonably wait. So that's exactly what our session is designed to unpack. We're going to be focusing on how to position ESG as a commercially viable business decision. And over the next hour, we're going to dig into the work that supports revenue, reduces risk, strengthens reputation, and improves decision making. So the goal today is simple: clearer priorities, stronger business cases, and more confidence in navigating ESG inside your organizations. And to guide us through this, we're joined by Daniel from Cool Planet. Daniel has been delivering sustainability solutions since 2007, which means he's seen the evolution of ESG from a nice to have to a fully embedded business strategy. He's worked across SMEs, government, and multinationals. He helps organizations design planet positive business models that actually stack up commercially. And when we talk about the full ESG spectrum, compliance, credibility, commercial impact, he really genuinely understands how all those pieces connect. What I really appreciate about Daniel's approach is that it's practical and it's grounded and it's about what works in the real world. So if you've been poring over spreadsheets and trying to figure out how to make the business case for ESG in your organization, then you're in the right room. So Daniel, we're glad to have you, and I will hand over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rihanna. That was an excellent introduction. So I do appreciate that. So look, it is a very interesting topic and I think quite timely because it is, there's different motivations for looking at sustainability and ESG. And so by really, being able to, how do we quantify and add benefit and looking at costs and looking beyond costs, how do we quantify things that drive, real systems change and deliver the outcomes we want to see. So I'm very happy to talk about it. So just give me 1 second and I shall share my screen so I can do this appropriately. Let's just go over here and then present. Right, and oops, I've gone a little bit too far. There we go, turning ESG into commercial value. I hope you can all see that well. So I won't dwell too much on some of these slides because I think there's sort of more nuanced feedback on what's relevant. But briefly about us, about Cool Planet, who I am. I started Cool Planet in 2007. We're now the longest running carbon consultancy in Australia. Off the back of that, Rihanna definitely touched on it, that I've seen quite a big evolution in this space over time, and it is now, particularly leading up to mandatory disclosure, there is now much more an imperative to be on the front foot with sustainability. So, I run a bespoke agency, you could say. So definitely climate expertise is the foundational piece of what we do. We're climate active consultants. We do a lot of carbon reporting. And really a large part of what we do now is how do we commercialize that side of it? It's, it shouldn't be seen that calculating carbon emissions is, and it costs you a lot of money. There are a lot of benefits that come out of it, and so engaging with businesses and making sure they're getting the most out of their sustainability journey is really important. And innovation, I think, is critical as well, particularly with AI, with different reporting systems and software. It is quite an exciting and interesting space to be in. So ensuring that you're on the front foot of reporting standards and expectations and the way to report is fundamental. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction to ESG, just so we're all on the same page with it. So ESG stands for environmental and social governance. It does cover a few different frameworks of how you report. Global Reporting Index, GRIs, one of the most well-known ones. In different parts of the world, there's different standards that are those frameworks, and you can move down into sort of impact reports and areas which are ESG reporting, but gives you a lot more freedom in exactly how you report. So a lot of what I do focuses on the environmental side, because we're looking at carbon emissions and environmental impact and waste recycling and energy use. But definitely governance is critical, and social is a very large part of it as well. And depending on the industry you're in, does give an indication of how much weight there is in there, basically, and how front and center it is. If you look at B Corp reporting, social impact is given as much weight as environmental impact. So it really just what you want to be front and center, but ideally all those things are addressed evenly. So commercializing ESG. So it has evolved massively over the time I've been doing it, and really in the last few years. I think since mandatory disclosure got introduced was big. I almost think as sort of a post-COVID way things have changed, because there's definitely been, I guess, the value put on ESG reporting and the amount of time and effort that's put into it. So previously it was would be the early adopters that are looking at it with limited frameworks and transparency. But now there are a number of frameworks that can be used, and depending on obviously the size and industry that you're in, the size of your business in the industry, you do get left behind if you're not, at the very least, thinking about it or having some kind of commitment information on your website. So this probably explains it, with a little more nuance. So why do it? So revenue and profitability is key, and we'll go into that in a little bit later exactly what that means on that side. Brand loyalty, I think, is pretty clear, and that ties into employee engagement. We are living in a world where the consumer is far more sophisticated than they were 10 years ago, and greenwashing gets called out on a regular basis. So, having a bomb-proof ESG report that can be held up under scrutiny is critical. Exposure risk and compliance demands, really that starts leading into mandatory disclosure, but exposure to risk is critical, and it is the way that mandatory disclosure is now reframing what sustainability looks like. It's not, hey, we want to do the right thing. It's that if you're not, looking at sustainability and look at your environmental and carbon exposure, then you are exposed to risk. So it is a reframing that definitely changes how people view it. Operational cost bases, really that's looking at utilities and energy efficiency, waste recycling, water. So by quantifying and tracking those, you definitely save money in those areas. So mandatory disclosure at a glance. This will be more relevant to certain businesses than others, but this has really changed the reporting landscape and the imperative of reporting. So to break it down in sort of its simplest phases, there's four phases. Governance is maybe the simplest, but really there has to be direct accountability from a board level that they are aware of environmental impacts and strategy, and that they are taking responsibility for it. So with mandatory disclosure, the directors are responsible. So if you're not reporting on it, or there's gaps in it, or things are incorrect, then directors are held accountable. And so they want to see a clear, hierarchy, map generally of exactly, are there sustainability committees, who's making responsibilities, who's approving things, who's signing them off. So they want to see that their sustainability is embedded throughout the organisation, and it's not just siloed off in some team that don't have accountability and aren't reporting through the chain of command. Strategy is really embedding sustainability in the broader business strategy. So having short-term, medium, and long-term planning is critical. It's no longer the sustainability strategy sat off to the side, or was an appendix on the broader business strategy. It needs to be integrated. Mandatory disclosure is reported inside financial disclosure, so it has to be very rigorous, and it's has to be embedded. It's the governance system. It's sustainability is embedded in the governance. Sustainability has to be embedded into the strategy, and so it's critical moving forward. That's the way it's merged with the greater business objectives. Risk management. So this is a big part of it. It's looking at what the key risks and opportunities are to a business. It's looking at physical risks, which is floods, droughts, heat waves, the actual physical ramifications of climate change. And then you have transition risks. And so the transition risks is looking more at regulation changes, looking at energy costs spiking, looking at the effects of transitioning to somewhere where climate change is impacting us all. So the transition risk, we'll look at reputation. We'll look at all those other factors that can also be reducing risk, but also it's opportunity, and that's where you can create value as well. Metrics and targets is really looking at your carbon reporting, greenhouse gas emissions. So it's how you're reporting them. There's different frameworks: greenhouse gas protocol, climate active. So really it's you're reporting on your carbon emissions, how they communicated, what frameworks are you using, and then targets are set out the back of that. So setting science-based targets, just setting internal targets. So it needs to be just really clear that these are your carbon emissions, and full transparency in how you've calculated and where your emissions boundaries are and what your targets are. So risk or opportunity. And so I think this is a critical change in the way people are viewing this. So historically, it's seen largely a burden, and regulatory compliance. So, and look, and some businesses still see it that way. But looking at ESG reporting, mandatory disclosure, target setting, carbon reporting, all of those things, and to look at it as a burden and something that we have to do, and we're going to do the bare minimum, is in itself a risk, because you're not taking that opportunity. So there's a broad range of areas that have to be reported. I mean, modern slavery now is very commonplace, that people have modern slavery statements, responsible procurement policies, looking at your supply chain and value chain. These are all things that a mature business that have progressed their sustainability strategy have looked at and have explored in some depth. And so if you're, have to do mandatory disclosure, or, you're a medium to large business, if you haven't at least looked at these things and identified, do we need to do this? Do we need to do it? are our competitors doing it, then that's definitely a risk. And so by being on the front foot, by leading in your industry, and looking what the future brings, all these things are opportunities to be able to stand out from the crowd. So it's definitely happening. And so definitely being on the front foot with it allows you to stand out from the competition. So once mandatory reporting is happening, then there's no benefit in trumpeting that because everyone has to do it. So there's no advantage to say, look, we're doing something that by law we have to do. So by going early, it enables you to have market advantage to be able to do it. So definitely, being on the front foot and looking forward into the future and having that sustainability strategy and roadmap and timeline in place gives you the benefit of turning what could just be a regulatory obligation into an opportunity. So, commercial framing. So, there's different ways to explain this. Obviously, the 3-pillar model of profit, people, and planet has been around for some time, and there's different terminology, but basically, they're the 3 pillars that sustainability is viewed through, and it sort of ties into ESG as well a bit as well. And so purpose is the 4th pillar. So that's actually having direction. What is the culture within the business? Why are you doing it? So I think that's important, particularly as employees want more of what they're doing as well, and there needs to be direction, and people, clients and customers will see through it as well, unless there's genuine purpose to what businesses are doing. So purpose drives profit. So understanding your purpose is critical. So it needs to go beyond responsibility and compliance, and it is quite broad. So by having a strong purpose and a strong mission, and I don't know if they're still used, but having a mission statement, I know was big 10 years ago, but it really comes down to the core of having a sustainability strategy. And in that sustainability strategy and your business strategy is really having some purpose about why we're doing it. And so from that, you will have the foundation of a great narrative, of the brand, of what you're doing. So this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're doing it. So I think that's a really critical thing. It then can tap into ethics and transparency. And again, when you're looking at ESG reporting, you've got to be transparent, and you have to have ethics because you have to look at all the, not all of them, but let's say the majority of environmental and social impacts of your products. It's hard to say, look, we're carbon neutral, yet we are outsourcing products to factories that are overseas, and we don't know how the workers are treated. So you have to look at it broadly, and there has to be transparency and ethics, and it's a holistic viewpoint, basically, of the business. And again, risk management and strategy is critical, and the way I frame it is margin protection moving forward. So what's happening is by limiting risk, you're allowing the continuation of your business to be profitable into the future. You're minimizing risk in an uncertain world. So by forward planning, looking at what the opportunity and looking what the risks are, it enables you to continue the business operating at its potential. So every organization is in the people business, and really this is talking the social impacts as well. And look, it's an interesting space in that it is harder to quantify in some areas. So what the KPIs are and how you drive that to a bottom line. So I think there are some very clear ways when you look at brand reputation, when you look at employee engagement. Being reputable is critical, and so how you quantify that, the good, having a strong diversity policy, or having the modern slavery policy as well. How do you actually turn that into what are the KPIs here? How do we turn this into a financial bottom line? And so it does vary business to business because it it varies on what you prioritize. It depends on, are you looking for brand loyalty in a competitive space? Do you have high turnover with your staff? Is that ESG report mandatory? And so there's a number of different ways to quantify it, but it does vary quite a lot business to business. But this page sort of explains most of them. So, Planet Positive Business. So, utility costs are traditionally where a lot of the savings have been won. So, you don't know and can't save what you don't measure. So, traditionally, energy and waste have been the big ones. So, from solar panels to energy efficiency, from LED light bulbs to refrigeration, that has always been a pretty strong area of pretty easy wins, because there you can have ROIs. You can look at exactly what the costs are with upgrading equipment and technological upgrades and looking at behavior change. So traditionally, that's been pretty straightforward, and most businesses are aware of that. It's rare that I'll go into a business and they don't have LED lights, or they're not aware of what their energy costs are, since energy costs are quite expensive and going up and fluctuating. So that's an easy win. If you're not tracking that and haven't looked at energy efficiency, that's really just one of the simplest ways that you can actually go in and immediately have costs reduced. Waste is exactly the same. Recycling is cheaper than landfill waste. Having targets there, looking at your waste and recycling, looking at bills. Again, how much of a cost and impact they are does depend on your industry. But again, the system is structured deliberately that landfill waste is significantly more expensive than combing and recycling. You've got food waste and composting in, and it varies a bit. So definitely, the more you recycle and the less it goes in landfill, you're immediately going to be saving costs as well. It's the same with water, but water's pretty cheap in the scheme of things, so it's generally less of a focus in that the monetary saves aren't as great, but definitely having targets and reducing water use. And I do think that as time goes on, water it is a finite resource, and we live in the second most, no, what is it, the driest inhabited continent on Earth, and so water at some point will start getting more and more expensive, and people think about it. Carbon emissions I've touched on before, but definitely measuring those is critical, and particularly if you're buying carbon offsets, or you're part of a supply chain, we've got to report on this side of things. Measuring your carbon emissions and then having a solid emissions reduction strategy is pretty critical. And then the other two with supply chain, product and services. Look, supply chain is really where a lot of work is going into, for a couple of reasons. One, that all the businesses are interconnected. And so once your organization has a sustainability strategy and is reporting on that, looking at your supply chain and value chain becomes critical. Looking at who your suppliers are, looking at distribution. If you're manufacturing, looking at life cycle analysis. So it's very important, because you can say, look, we're really sustainable, but we're dealing with other providers that aren't. And then as the things get more sophisticated and more interconnected and transparent, then these will become more and more apparent. And the second one is really that once you start looking at mandatory disclosure, there's going to be a massive push down supply chains for the reporting of environmental impact, like Coles and Woolworths, which have a massive amount of suppliers and producers. When they have to start reporting on their carbon emissions, they're going to push down that chain and go, well, we've got to report on it, so we're going to prioritise and prefer suppliers that are reporting on it as well. I've already seen a number of big multinationals do it as well, and businesses come to me panicking, going, look, this is where we get the most of our work from. And they're now saying that if we don't have a sustainability strategy in place, if we're not calculating our carbon emissions and have targets we're reaching, then we are not going to be a preferred supplier, and we're going to lose the work. So there is going to be this huge push down and flow down effect down supply chains and value chains. So it's one of those things, again, that by being on the front foot, will mean that you're not scrambling and you're not going to lose work by not being prepared. So aligning the profit with the planet. So again, these are quite broad terms, but definitely when we look at our competitive advantage and bringing value to what we're doing, having a strong sustainability story definitely allows you to increase revenue and everything that comes with that. You're reducing your business risk and you're identifying inefficiencies. So the different ways of looking at it, and each business and industry, it will be slightly different what those focuses are. Definitely reducing inefficiencies through the previous slide and what I've talked about is massive, but some businesses will have already done that and they're looking, okay, I've got the solar panels, how do I move forward with this? And so definitely in a competitive space, having brand credibility is critical. And so by being able to put that front and center is really important. And we do that a lot now with our clients, in that you can do all the good work, but unless you're promoting it effectively, then you're not really getting the greatest benefit out of it. So we've been, a couple of customers that do so much great work, and I'm like, look, you barely touch on it on your website. Why isn't this all this great work front and center? Like, shout it from the rooftops if you're doing it and you're leading in this space. And they did that. They got an impact report. They put it all on their website. They did an advertising campaign and immediately got more business out of it. So if you're doing the hard work and have a great story to tell, then definitely go out there and tell it. Long-term value and sustainable businesses in long term, definitely great things to be doing. And again, I touched on it previously, but by reducing your risk enables you to maintain profit in the future. It is an unusual world at the moment. Where, definitely what happens overseas affects us if there's tariffs or there's wars and different things going on. But by able to look at what is material within the business, look at what the risks are, depending on your industry, and go, okay, where are we exposed here? What's going to happen? Do we rely on products from overseas? Have we got high staff turnover? If there's a heat wave or flooding or drought, does that impact on what we're doing? So, but at least identifying what the impacts are going to be, where you're most exposed to risk, and looking at ways to mitigate that is critical for long-term strategy and reducing your risk. So to me, that's one of the key areas is identifying and mitigating risks moving into the future is really critical. Getting started. So there's different ways to skin a cat, but broadly how we do it with an ESG strategy. And so generally, number one is just establishing what the priorities, why you're doing this. Is this regulatory? Are you wanting to do it? Are your competitors doing it and you're being left behind? Have you got pressure from the supply chain that now you've got to do it as well? And from that, really what's critical to me is, are you wanting to do the bare minimum? Is it sort of kicking and screaming down this thing? Or do you see this as an opportunity and you really want to get behind it? Is the whole organization behind it? Is it just, one person who's the champion, but the board doesn't want to get into it? So it's really important to, one, in a technical sense, establish the boundaries about what you're going to include in your reporting, what you're not. But really, what is the motivation? Who's on board? Where are going to be the barriers to this being a success? And look, we definitely have clients that go, look, I just have to meet, I've got a timeline. I've got to meet this mandatory reporting. I just want to do that. And look, and that's fine, because that will build over time. But understanding the appetite for how far that sustainability strategy goes is really critical, because there's a lot of industries where I can go to a restaurant and go, look, you can be the most sustainable restaurant in Australia if you want to be. This is what you'd have to do. So it's just understanding how much time, effort, and desire there is, because that'll determine how quickly and how far that journey goes. The next step is really materiality assessment. So understanding how the business operates, and I touched on a little bit before about what the motivation is, but stakeholder engagement is really speaking to the different key areas of the business, largely it's board, exec team, it might be managers, sustainability committee, and often employees to get their feedback. So it's really understanding what does the organisation think the risks are and the opportunities. What there may be misaligned priorities, because you may find that, look, all the employees and managers think that this is really important, but the exec team have different goals as well. So the materiality framework really helps you identify what's important to the business and what's not, and that's the lens that you then start reporting on key metrics moving forward. So goals and objectives, those two things lead to KPIs. What kind of frameworks you can report in? Are you just going to do carbon emissions? Are you doing a full ESG report? Are you doing to a GRI standard? Are you going to start with a sustainability strategy? There's a whole range of solutions to what you want to do, and what's going to, what means success. How is it a 5-year strategy, a 10-year strategy? So really getting under the hood and putting in some specific timelines and responsibility is that phase. And so generally business will start with, say, a sustainability strategy or a sustainability roadmap, just so we're clear, okay, these are the things you want to do, this is the timeline, and this is who's responsible. So if that's not in place, then it definitely is a risk of greenwashing, because to have very general, broad targets and then not having accountability and not having timelines, to me is a large part of what greenwashing is. So really, this step allows you to really just get really clear on what you're trying to achieve and what timeline you're going to do it in. And that leads then to implementation roadmap, where really you then start implementing what the strategy says. We're going to do these things in this timeline, and the implementation roadmap goes, okay, now we're doing the site visits. Now we're looking at bins and light bulbs and reviewing your strategies and looking at governance and reviewing existing systems and gap analysis. So that's actually getting your hands dirty and doing it. Tracking review is really then when you revisit, generally it's an annual process, and really just going, do we meet the targets? What needs to be changed? How can we improve on these systems? How are we tracking to our goals? Thank you. There you go. I will stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. It's so helpful to just talk about like the challenges that everyone in this room is feeling, and like talk about it in practical ways. That's really helpful.
Awesome.
We have a few questions in the chat, and I'm not going to jump in front of anyone this time. I'm going to be polite. So I'm going to answer. Someone has asked, thanks, Daniel. You said about shouting from the rooftops when companies do make progress. What do you think is making them not do this now? Are they afraid of greenwashing or imperfection?
Look, that's a good question. And look, they're both valid reasons why people don't do it. Let's say, from my experience, the businesses that don't do it, definitely, my role with working with businesses is to give them confidence in what they're doing, that when they start promoting something, that it holds up under scrutiny and that there's transparency and reporting frameworks. And so definitely we've got clients when they do internal reporting and they go, oh, look, we've developed our own carbon calculator and we're just calculating stuff internally that one of the guys did, but we're unsure if this is okay to put out there, then that may limit them. They'll go, look, we feel okay, but we think that under scrutiny, what emissions factors are we using? What framework? So I'll go in there and give them that confidence. So I think that's, look, probably number one. And sometimes it can be just a misalignment of marketing, departments and sustainability departments. So unless there's a holistic view and sustainability is embedded in the strategy, then they promote it. But definitely, I've worked in organizations where, they might be like, hey, we've done this great ESG report, and they just send out a LinkedIn post and that's it. So there needs to be more alignment. And I think that's where the governance and strategy and looking at the business holistically comes in.
Yeah, I mention that all the time about breaking down the silos of it, because the marketing and comms team needs to be involved with the sustainability team, which needs to be supported by the finance team and all of that. It can't be just one person shouting out all the work.
Yeah. Look, and to go on from that, I think that is let's say definitely from a mandatory disclosure point of view, you have to put in your governance, and you've got to say how all those areas interrelate. So sort of gone are those days in the larger organizations that can just go, oh no, the sustainability sits over there. It's like, no, it needs to be embedded in strategy, decision making, exec level decisions. So, that's what they're trying to achieve. So it's accountability and holistic view.
Yeah, totally. All right, we're getting some more questions in, so I'm going to try to run through a few of these. From Matt. Thanks for the session, Daniel. I work with procurement and supply chains who often struggle to integrate the many, many ESG risks and opportunities into a broader value for money decision. What are your thoughts on using social value as a language for translating ESG into dollars and cents that can be evaluated alongside other aspects of commercial value?
Yes, look, I think that there has to be weight on it. EcoVadis is, let's say, an accreditation, a little bit like B Corp, but looks purely at supply chain and value chain. So definitely that there has to be weight on social welfare, but particularly if you're dealing internationally with organizations. So I think it's one thing to just say, look, it's carbon emissions or environmental impact. There has to be social well-being of the workforce as well. So, how you quantify that in dollar and cents, I think it's quantifying it as risk and saying, by working with you, we're exposing ourselves to risk because you haven't disclosed these information about the business. And so the businesses that have disclosed that, then you're limiting your risk, because then you go, we're a sustainable business and we know that our supply chain is sustainable as well. So I would put as much weight on social well-being as on the environmental side of it as well. But generally, it's framed as a risk. Being risk adverse or exposing yourself to risk is generally the framework it's looked at now.
Yeah. All right. I'll get to a question from Sarah. I agree with you that the value is created, but how do you actually embed this into budget allocation and financial planning?
Yes. So, look, I guess you have marketing budget, let's say, as a framework. So you'd have to sort of go, look, the amount we're investing in the ESG reporting, and then we're going to promote this, then what kind of return do we think we're going to get on it? Because you can do all the ESG reporting, and if you're not promoting it, then it's probably going to be hard to quantify what benefit there is, unless you're looking at, being, risk adverse or employee retention or, internal metrics, which a lot of businesses do. So that's the way that we track it with our businesses. You go, okay, here's the work we've done. How are you going to promote it to your clients? Are you going to do through LinkedIn? Are you going to put on your website? Are you going to put it on your packaging? And so then it's reasonably easy to track how effective that is, because you can go, look, we've got two different product lines. One we've promoted, one we haven't. What kind of return do we get on it? So that's generally the way that it's worked into the financial side of it, because you can just track how effective it is and how effective the messaging is.
Totally. All right, we have a question that says, I work with a charity and their board are now AI obsessed. Do you have any tips for guiding that AI conversation back into ESG, or are there ways to get those aspects to work together?
Yes. Well, I guess the way I'm reading that question is using AI as a software solution, as opposed to the impacts of using AI because it uses more water and more the data centers, that side of thing. But let's say the broader question of how AI can be embedded in workflows and sustainability reporting. So we're currently working on a AI platform because it has changed so rapidly. That space. I mean, AI is going to be disruptive to a lot of industries, but definitely sustainability reporting can be quite onerous. And so if you can streamline that process and take the reporting burden away from the organization, then that's better for everyone. And it also stops me doing a lot of work as well, which I think is good, because then I can do more face-to-face and I'm not just sitting there trawling through electricity bills, working out kilowatt hours and that kind of stuff to do carbon reporting. So AI will definitely play a big role in it, and there will be, I would imagine, a competitive and a number of new platforms coming online this year that will all say, we're going to make your reporting so much easier. We've already got sort of Xero and MYOB plugins, but to streamline and automate your ESG reporting requirements, AI will play a very big role in that.
Yeah, awesome. Hopefully make jobs easier, I guess.
That's right.
We had a question or a comment in the chat about how reporting really doesn't affect small and medium businesses. And you mentioned the supply chains today, but you also, I listened to your podcast interview from last week with Kian. Um, so I'm wondering what you might say to the smaller businesses that are supplying to the bigger guys. They think mandatory reporting doesn't affect them yet, and maybe they have fear about the cost of life cycle analyses and things like that. What might you say to them to get them to view it in a different way, where they don't feel
Yeah.
it's not required, but it does affect them?
Yeah, no, that's right. Look, we have a lot of SME clients, and there seems to be a sweet spot that's generally about 20 to 60 employees. There's sort of a range there where still got good turnover, reasonable amount of staff, and sustainability becomes more relevant. So there's a couple of ways to look at it. One is that there's going to be pressure down the supply chain, basically, that, if you're dealing with bigger clients, they're going to want that information, and you're future-proofing yourself by having that information ready. And the other side is you may not be doing mandatory disclosure, you may not be doing ESG reporting, but definitely to have a sustainability strategy, maybe a sustainable procurement policy, to have anti-slavery or sort of social policies is just smart business sense. I mean, it does depend on the industry you're in, but solutions and communication. So definitely a small SME doesn't need to go spend 120 grand on some massive, sustainability outcome, but definitely, having that strategy, to have those frameworks, having had that discussion, it's far better to be on the front foot with it and see it as an opportunity and get benefit out of it than something happens down the track and you're like, oh, we really didn't see that coming. We're unprepared, or now our business is losing out to other businesses doing it. So to me, it's a risk conversation, and by doing it early, you get all the benefits and opportunity of being able to promote that, which, in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you won't have. It will be commonplace. So the biggest companies have to do it, then it goes down the chain. And so the end game will be that SMEs and every organization will have to be reporting to some degree, because it will be required to do business. So be on the front foot with it and, reap the benefits of doing that.
Mm. Yeah, I always obviously I'm a marketing manager, so I always think about things in terms of protecting my brand, but it's about protecting the business's brand as well. Like you said, if it's not done in 5 years and you have made no progress, or no, even if it's an internal strategy of effort of some sort, I think brands will be completely irrelevant, because consumers have just access to so much information now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So we have a question in here as well that's pretty timely. You touched on global issues like tariffs, wars, and scaling back of policies. How do we keep the momentum going, or even make a start on it, when to some it might seem like there's more risk than opportunities in ESG strategy?
Yes. Well, look, there's always been, I guess, disruption of some kind, and there will always be disruption. So really what we're wanting is continuity in Australia, because that's what affects us the most. I mean, there's other things that are outside our control. And look, if you're manufacturing overseas or importing things in, there's more risk in what happens internationally. But let's say the Australian government, historically, there's been a dearth of leadership on the issue, I would say, for the last sort of 15 years. And now there is some leadership. Let's say we've got, without getting too political, but say a more progressive government that now we've got mandatory disclosure and a whole range of sort of environmental policies in place. But there hasn't been much leadership in that space at all. So to me, that's where the risk is that, one, there's little guidance federally. There's a lot of state governments have stepped up, and a lot of industry has stepped up as well in that vacuum. And so really, what we need is just some continuity and surety about the future. Because the risk is you go, okay, well, I've done all the mandatory reporting in the ESG and it was mandatory, and now there's a change in government and they rip up all those things and now it's all irrelevant. So there's always some level of risk. I would like to think that's very unlikely, how things currently are. But even just the threat of it, I think, is undermining. So we will be doing it. It becomes mandatory, but then it just becomes commonplace. So I don't think, people start doing it and then there's policy changes. There's still benefit. I think the time has passed where there's just the stick approach. I think you got to look at there's a carrot there moving forward.
Yeah, totally. All right. I think I can squeeze in one more question. Oh, two more have come in.
That's fine.
One person said, do you have advice for sustainability collaboration? So many organizations are spending money and expertise to solve the same collective problems or the problems with the same suppliers, but surely there's commercial value in figuring out how to work together.
Look, that's a good question. I guess that would look broadly into circular economy principles. And so being interconnected, if that's the same industry, same geographical location, same, motivation, let's say. So there's definitely an opportunity for businesses to be working more collaboratively. I think that there's a massive opportunity there. I think particularly there's two. There's geographical, you're in the same town and you've got the same constraints. And then if you're in the same industry, because then you are going to be dealing with a lot of the same issues. So it's a space that will need to mature and develop, but definitely circular economy is, maybe it's not a new idea, but let's say it's still in its infancy, how that works. But definitely moving to a broader system change where it's circular economy and there is no waste because businesses are interconnected and businesses' outputs become another business's inputs, and the whole principle of that dynamic, I think, will become more and more relevant as time goes on. And absolutely, I think you're right. There is, by more communication, more openness between organisations that are facing the same barriers and opportunities can only lead to better outcomes. So it will happen. It's just how quickly.
Yeah, I often think about that in terms of industry associations as well. And we have a few on the call today, actually, and I think that's so important. If there is one for your industry, then they are doing collective work to solve the problems and try to figure out what's best for their members as well. So being involved with industry associations can be a huge help in getting that collaboration sparked, I think.
Yeah. Look, and that's a good point, and because definitely, I go to business networking things, what I mean. So
Yeah.
on a practical level, if you go to a B Corp coffee, or you go to this is a seminar, or even webinars like this, definitely then you're going to see like-minded people. So maybe on a practical level, I was thinking more high level, but definitely by actually just reaching out and going to the industry
Yeah.
associations and conferences, you are going to be aligned with people and have those opportunities to connect.
Yeah, it's really the people that are like us wearing hats that are trying to solve the sustainability problems, just shaking hands with each other, I think.
That's right.
All right, I do have one more question that came in, and we have a couple more minutes. So I'm going to try to get it in. We have someone that says, we're focused on improving the circularity of products and sourcing new materials, and we're planning a take back program. But now they're shifting to preparing reporting for their major retailers. She's trying to convince the business that we need to keep focusing on circularity as well as carbon reporting. Do you think circularity will be relevant to reporting in the future?
Look, it's always very relevant. So let's say ideally you do both of them, because it's hard to sort of go, well, is one more important than the other? Let's say if you're exposed to mandatory disclosure, then from a risk point of view, well, you have to do that. So probably you would prioritise that. But you'd like to think it wasn't a zero-sum game and that you could do a take-back scheme as well. So look, it's hard to know without the nuances about how far those things have progressed and the industry and how that works. But look, I think a take-back scheme has a lot of environmental benefits, having that circular economy model. And definitely if you start doing, ESG reporting, look, mandatory disclosure wouldn't touch on that very much. You could definitely put it in there as a thing, but it's not a requirement to, let's say, put that in there. So it's not a regulatory burden, but definitely if you're looking at ESG reporting and talking about the sustainability credentials of your business, then that's a pretty big thing to be doing, going, look, we're embracing circular economy and eliminating waste and taking back your product. So it's just how much value you put on that.
Yeah, I think owning the whole of the life cycle can be a huge win right now when not many groups are doing that. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's taking that opportunity, because few people are doing it, and so it does really separate you from the crowd if you can do that when not many people are.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, we're getting close to time, and I'm sure there's questions that I haven't asked, but I will go back through the chat before I send the email today and make sure everything gets answered in that follow-up email. So thanks for joining us today, everyone. It's always great to see this group come together and share what's working and what's challenging and how all these things are evolving inside so many different kinds of businesses. Big thank you to Daniel for such a practical session and for bringing clarity to the space. It really feels overwhelming sometimes when we don't know where to start or who can answer our questions. I'll send the follow-up email shortly. And until next time, thanks so much, everyone, for being a part of it. See you soon.
Right. Thanks, everyone.